Alright, so since the instrument, the guitar, is such a weird instrument, like it's just a piece of wood with some strings on it and then some frets, a lot of people, almost all guitar players, has no idea what they're doing regarding chords. And that's also the reason that there's so much shape work on the guitar. We are learning shapes. It has some pros, it has some cons. The obvious pros is that it's so easy to just move chords around. It's not like on a piano at all. So once you got the shapes down, it makes a lot of sense that once you got those shapes down, you can easily move stuff around and move a whole song, a complete song. You can move it into a different key and you just play the same stuff, just moved a few frets or something like that. So that's a really cool thing. The con really for almost all guitar players, and especially within rock and blues, because ask pretty much any rock guitar player or blues player and ask him what's going on in this chords that he's playing, and very few actually know what they're doing. They're just playing, yeah, I know that this is a A minor, I know that this is a C major chord, I know this is a G7 or G dominant chord, but why is it G dominant? Why do you play so many strings if it's a chord that only consists of 3 notes? You know, I've been teaching for maybe 25 years now, maybe even more, probably even more, and in all those years, every time I talk about chord, people are just one big question mark, you know what I'm saying? Because every time I say, we talk about chords, but there are 6 notes in these chords, and they're right. You know, if we're talking about a standard bar chord, they're right about that. But the thing is that it only consists of 3 notes, this particular chord. So some of the notes are doubled up. So that's one thing. And the obvious thing, we have something called inversions, you know, and they make so much sense on the piano. And you'll also see that the approach for a pianist who's playing, for example, something, let's say that he has a C major 7, for example, for a whole bar, you'll never just see him play boom for a whole bar, or boom boom like a guitar player would, you know. They obviously, or piano players will in most situations make use of all those inversions just to make it sound a little more interesting, you know. So let's say that we have those that C major 7, for example, here. We'll have those 4 inversions, and even up here, and then it starts over again. You will hear piano players move around those, and you can obviously, since I'm playing on this 4 high strings now, you can obviously do those on the 4 middle, 4 high strings, 4 middle and 4 low strings. So that's one thing, but even the whole theory of playing inversions, since we have, you know, a root note, a third, a fifth, and then if we're talking about chords that consist of 4 notes, you'll have the 7th, right? So we'll move those up and down, and so let's to give that a code, we will call the root note 1, the third we'll call 3, the fifth we'll call, well, 5, the 5th, or the 7th we'll call the 7th. So we got 1, 3, 5, 7. That's the first inversion. In theory, the next inversion would be 3, 5, 7, 1. And in theory, the next inversion would obviously be 5, 7, 1, 3. And obviously the last one would be 7, 1, 3, 5. Excuse me. But that's doesn't make sense on the guitar, since the whole way that it's built, the whole way that we, you know, we also have one of the first things that you'll notice that is the difference between the piano and the guitar, is that we have the same note more than one place in the same octave. and you won't find that on the keyboard or on the piano. So this also makes the guitar a little bit obsolete to that whole idea of using inversion in that way. So us as guitar players, we have to be a little more inventive with the way that we arrange chords. So we can still make use of all those different notes and obviously play 7th chords, and we can add the 9th and the 11th and 13th, but we have to think a little bit more creatively in the way that we arrange chords, also just to make it possible for the hand to play, because some chords, if we played it exactly as it was on the piano, it would be pretty much impossible to play on the guitar. So what we're going to use here in this program, I'm going to show you, first of all, I'm going to show you how to make use of the inversions of the most common chords, like the minor 7, the dominant, the major 7, and also the minor 7 flat 5. But the other thing we're going to work with here in this program, and also talk about how do you practice this, how do you make use of this, and just not learn a bunch of chords and then you'll have to memorize them, because that's not going to work. Trust me, you know. It's like trying to learn a whole new language and then never use it. And believe me, after 10 years you won't remember jack shit, man. Okay, so anyway, that's what we're going to go through here in this program. And so we got a few systems for learning these chords. For example, if we want to just play basic chords like 4 notes chords and 5, 6, 7, obviously we won't be able to play theoretically a correct 7-note chords, because it's not possible on 6 strings. So, and it's not just a question of playing a 7-string guitar instead, because it will not sound good, and in many situations won't even be possible to play unless you retune the guitar in different kinds of ways. So that's not what we're going to be after here. We want to make sure that we are making use of the important notes, because believe me or not, there are notes that are more important than others. And to give you a very interesting example here is actually the 3rd will always be the most important note in a chord. And many people say, what are you talking about? That must be the root note, but that's actually not true. The most important note is the 3rd, because this note will tell us are we playing minor or major. And the next would be, I'm not saying the root note is not important, but the 3rd is actually the most important, and then the 7th actually is very important. But of course, if we're talking about triads, we're not going to use the 7th. But the 5th is the least important note. And this is really interesting, because if we got a basic major triad here, actually let's do a little analysis here, because actually you'll see that out of those 6 notes that we're playing, which my beginner students were totally right about here, they're right, this consists of six notes, but there's not 6 different notes. Actually, we got the root note 3 times, which is kind of scary, since I just stated that the root note is not the most important note. So that's 3, right, out of 6. That's 50%. So then we got the 5th twice, and that's the least important note. And this is 2, so now we're up to 5, and then the last note we'll find out is the 3rd. So actually we only got the 3rd, which is the most important note, 1 time. That sucks, man. That's weird. But there's no doubt, and it makes sense that these bar chords are so popular, because they are very handy once you get used to them. I know that if you're a guitar player who just picked up the guitar a week or 2 ago, you probably hate bar chords, or maybe you haven't even got to learning bar chords. So, but once you get them, they are so amazing and so quickly to make use of them. And also, as I stated here in the beginning, they are amazing in the way that you can move around keys. So that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. But So this is so if we talk about the just as a fun example, we got a if we can call it a code being 1 5 1 3 5 1, and the numbers, as I said before, represents the notes in the chord, the root, the third, and the fifth. So you can see that root note, fifth, root note, third, the major third in this example, fifth, and the root again. So that would be the code. But what we're going to talk about here, get more into here, is the 4-note chords and above and beyond. So we're going to talk about major 7, for example, but then also major 9, major 11, and major 13. And for those we got a code as well. And once you understand that code, that number code, it becomes so easy to build chords. And what can you use this system for? Well, I'll tell you really quick. Maybe not really quick. But what you can use this code for is to avoid learning a million chords. So this is an awesome system. So this system, I'm going to say this again, this system lets you only remember the chords that you need within a time frame of blah blah blah, whatever. I can't tell you exactly. But the cool thing about it is that you don't need to learn and understand 1 million different chords to be able to play a lot of different songs. No, you just need to know the system. So once you know the system, you can, like lightning, you can create chords yourself. You can just take a look at, for example, something as advanced as if you want to play fusion music, jazz music, and you can play any of those and build the chords from there once you got the understanding, the theoretically understanding of building a chord. So as I said before, instead of knowing a lot of different notes, different chords, you need to know a system. And the system lets you build those chords that you need in the situation really quick. I'm not saying that you shouldn't, of course, know, and you will also just automatically know a lot of chords, well, quite a few different chords. The ones that you use most regularly, of course, you remember, but you don't have to remember all those kinds of weird ones like major raised 11ths, flat 16ths, blah, blah, blah. I'm just, randomly shouting catchphrases at you with weird chords, You don't have to understand them. You don't have to remember how they look. But once you know the system, you can quickly identify them on the guitar. And so this is such a cool system, and I want to teach you that system, and we're going to go through a lot of the, I'm not going to say main chords because there's no such thing, but we're going to go through the most obvious ones, like the obviously the triads really quick. I'm going to go through the triads really quick because I expect that you know them already by now, but I want to show you still a few interesting triads that you might not have thought about before. And I even want to show you a few triads that sounds almost not like triads. And of course it depends a little bit on how you would analyze it. But they are triads. They're only making use of those three general chords. Those three general notes. And but you can arrange them in such a way so you get kind of a new, interesting sound. But other than that, I'm going to show you, of course, a system to remember. Also, the most basic, major 7, minor 7, dominant. Minor 7 flat 5, and the reason for talking about those exact chords are, of course, that they fit within the major / minor natural minor scale. But other than that, I'll also show you how to make use of the really quick of using the inversions, so that you can really quickly go through the different inversions and make an interesting chord or a boring chord progression. You can make it really interesting using using the inversions, because if you, for example, as I said before, if you have a whole bar with just one chord, which you do in a lot of situations with pop and rock and stuff like that, and blues, and then you can make it really interesting sounding, making use of the inversions, and it's just also just a lot more fun to do it this way, to play like this, a very creative way to play. So obviously there also will be a little bit of theory involved, and a little bit some, you know, getting to know the fretboard. Of course, you can't help but getting a little bit of that involved too here in this program.